So I think we have a pretty awesome opportunity right now over these 3 weeks, so last week, this week, and next week, to look at the eternal state, which in my view, the eternal state is heaven in the fullest sense. So when we think of living with God for eternity, when we think of eternal life, this passage in Revelation chapter 21, the beginning of chapter 22, should be what we think about when we think of heaven and life with God forever. But we do have a few difficulties when it comes to dwelling on eternity. And I think this is one of the reasons that there's not a whole lot of information in the Bible when it comes to heaven and the eternal state. And I think our big problem is we just don't have anything to relate to it. We've never been to heaven. We can't fully comprehend what it'll be like to dwell with the Lord in glory, to be surrounded by innumerable angels. I don't know about you, but I have never seen an angel. And in the waiting period right now, if someone dies before the rapture, they're going to be living in heaven in a spiritual state, waiting on their resurrected bodies. And we really don't know what that type of an existence is going to be like. In some ways, though, we are helped a little bit, and at the same time still hurt when we think about the eternal state, because as we're going to see, the eternal state, unlike heaven, is described very much as a physical existence, and that helps us because we live physical lives right now. But at the same time, it's also a clear merging of heaven coming down to earth. And no one has ever experienced the merging of heaven and earth before. So for the first 8 years that I spent living down here, this is our 8th anniversary of moving down to the area here, I never went on to the Gulf of Mexico a single time. Our family swam at the beaches a few times at the Gulf, but I was never on a boat on the Gulf until this year. Thanks to Tim first, I went on a fishing boat with him, and that was amazing. And then our family went on a cruise on the Gulf last week. But up until this summer, if someone ever talked about anything with being on the water in the Gulf, it just did not mean anything to me because I had no reference point to what it would be like. I actually thought that when I was going to go fishing with Tim, I thought it was going to be one of the most miserable days of my life. For two reasons. One, I had never caught a fish before that day. And two, I thought that being on the water, I would probably be sick and throwing up the entire time. So I thought it would be catching no fish and throwing up the entire day. And it actually still surprises me how much I enjoyed that day because I thought it was going to be like one of the worst experiences ever. And then our family went on a cruise. And up until us going on a cruise, if anybody else talked about their time on a cruise, I really could care less about somebody else's cruise stories. Like I try to be kind of interested if they talked about it, but I had nothing to compare it to. And now after our family has gone on a cruise, there's like a bunch of stories. I want to hear from other people who've gone on a cruise. Like I want to know the craziest person that you met on a cruise ship because we met some people that were real crazy on this ship. So I want to hear about their craziest people. I want to hear what the rockiest experience was with the boat moving back and forth. My dad ends up telling me after we got back from our cruise that the one time him and my mom went on a cruise, it was so bad on the last night on the cruise ship that when they got up the next morning, they walked past the main theater area they had for the cruise ship, and the cruise's grand piano had flipped over in the midst of the storm and was laying, upside down on the ground of the stage there. So he had quite the storm story to tell. And I can relate a little bit, though, to that stuff now. So I want to hear more about it. And one of our problems with talking about the eternal state, the merging of heaven and earth, is that no one has experienced that. You haven't, I haven't, even my mom and our loved ones who are in glory, they haven't experienced that yet. The angels in heaven haven't experienced that. And so because of that, there's a lot that we should expect when we talk about the New Jerusalem to not be relatable. And I think that's the reason John couldn't really get into a lot of depth when it comes to describing the eternal state. And I'm going to guess another reason he didn't go into a lot of depth of the eternal state, because I'm going to guess that in some ways he might describe some things that we can't relate to, like I could not relate to fishing until I went out there, that we'd hear about those things and we'd say, Yeah, I'm not really looking forward to that. One of the things that surprised me was I talked about how we would be living in the city of the New Jerusalem when I was at my country church in West Groton. And the response I got to talking about us living in the city of the New Jerusalem was that all of these people who lived in this rural country church, their response was unanimous. They don't want to live in a city, and they are not looking forward to having a home in a city for eternity. For them, it was that they thought that would be miserable. And so we need to understand there's some things that we can't relate to here, but we should still trust in the Lord that it will be wondrous beyond our dreams, even if we haven't experienced it. So really, I think what we get in Revelation 21 and 22 is just enough of a glimpse for us to get sort of the smallest grain of what our eternity will be like. And we get our first glimpse of the city that we'll dwell in verses 9 through 11 of Revelation 21. Then one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls full of the seven last plagues came and spoke with me, saying, "Come here, I will show you the bride, the wife of the Lamb." And he carried me away in a spirit to a great and high mountain and showed me the city, Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, having the glory of God. Her brilliance was like a very costly stone, as a stone of crystal clear jasper. So, the first thing to notice about this section is that the angel who delivers this vision is one of the angels who delivered the plague. And he's the one who describes and talks about the New Jerusalem. And this provides further weight to Robert Thomas's theory that even the description of the final state is meant to be a form of judgment, a judgment to proclaim to the unbeliever that when they reject Jesus, not only are they rejecting Jesus, but they're rejecting this eternity. They're rejecting this eternal life with Christ. But let's focus our attention on the holy city. We have Jerusalem coming down from heaven, and we have that written here that it is the bride, the wife of the Lamb. And as I've mentioned before, that bride and wife language is used in both the Old and the New Testament to point to both Israel and the church. And it will be explicit soon in this passage that the New Jerusalem, this bride and wife of the Lamb, is all of those in Israel and the church. So I'm one of those people that I'm all for the distinctions between Israel and the church, seeing Israel's important role in the Old Covenant, our important role in the New Covenant, Israel's important role in the tribulation, the millennial kingdom. But they, in the end state, when we're all in the New Jerusalem together, we will dwell together as one people of God in one city. So who is this final city of heaven coming to earth for? It is for those who are the bride of the Lamb, and that is Israel and the church. So all of us together are in this city. And before we come to the second point of this city, just a brief explanation point. When John speaks of being carried in the Spirit to a great high mountain, understand that John is not saying he's going to be carried to a great high mountain, which is the city. The mountain is not the city. The mountain is speaking of a vantage point that John goes upon in order to behold the city. So I'm not sure if this is a physical city a physical mountain that's going to be in the new earth, or maybe just saying he's on a high point in order to gaze upon the city. But the purpose of bringing John onto a high mountain is a way to prime up our emotions. This is meant to say, okay, you're about to see something. John's about to see something that is so grand, so large, so magnificent that you can't sit in the front row in order to enjoy it. It would be like going to see the world's largest IMAX screen and then sitting 5 feet in front of the screen. You'd be like, I can't even see this all. You got to go to the back if you want to take it all in. You got to go up onto the mountain. So this is a way to say the New Jerusalem is going to be a grand scene, a grand city, and we got to get a high point if we want to be able to view it all. And it starts with describing the New Jerusalem as a city that is not built from the ground up. It is a city that is not built by rock and roll, but it is a city, the first city ever, that comes down from heaven to earth. So the heavenly Jerusalem, the city of glory, this is the dwelling place of God in heaven. This is the city that is holy because it is the place where God reigns. And by having the New Jerusalem come down to earth, what we're having is, for the first time ever, heaven and earth will be one. So the eternal state is not an earthly state, it's not a heavenly state, but it is those two coming together. And this is part of where this is hard, because what's it going to be like when heaven and earth come together? I don't know. Never happened. No one has experienced this before. So there are some things about it that should be familiar because it'll be physical, it'll be earthly, it'll be earth coming to heaven. But there are some things that we should expect to not be familiar with, not to be relatable. And that doesn't mean they're not going to happen. It doesn't mean it's not true. It doesn't mean it's just spiritual imagery, because we're talking about heaven and earth coming together. So there's some parts of this where we should be like, I don't know how that's going to work, but I've never been in that kind of a situation before. No one has, so I'll just trust what we have before it. But I think the key is to understand that our eternal state will be both earthly and heavenly. It'll be physical and spiritual. And John describes the two coming together as best he says, saying that heaven is like a very costly, crystal clear jasper. Now, notice he's saying it's like that. It's not that the city's going to be one giant jasper cube, but it's going to be like one, as if you're having a brilliant stone, lights shining upon it, and it is making everything around it more brilliant with its vibrant and various colors. So heaven's going to come down to earth in brilliant splendor. The God of glory will be among us. And then we're going to talk about the border of this city for a few moments now in verses 12 through 14. It had a great wall with 12 gates, and at the 12 gates the gates 12 angels, and names were written on them, which are the names of the 12 tribes of the sons of Israel. There were 3 gates on the east, 3 gates on the north, 3 gates on the south, 3 gates on the west, and the wall of the city had 12 foundation stones, and on them were 12 names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. So you have a lot of people question why it is a walled city. Does the city need protection from those on the outside? Are there people who are dwelling on the new earth that we want to keep out of the city? Does this mean there's going to be unsaved people in eternity? I believe the purpose of these walls are for beauty. A walled city sitting on a hill is beautiful. I mean, we got a lot of wonderful cities that have great views in America today. I mean, I love what New Orleans looks like at nighttime when you see all the lit up skyscrapers. I just think it's a cute little small size city, and it looks nice when you're driving at it from a distance. But a lit up walled city, like an old walled medieval city, they're just gorgeous at night. And so I believe it will be first and foremost for beauty. Second, it is for a border to make it an actual city. When you look at a lot of what we have written in the Old Testament, God loves nations. God loves the variety of nations. He loves the variety of people groups. And I believe we will continue to see this for all eternity. So the New Jerusalem, I think the way it's presented will be like a central hub city for all the nations of the world. And all the people who are living on earth during that time period will probably have a residence in the city and then around the world. And so we'll able to be our own nations and people groups, but then come together in the New Jerusalem as well. The walls also serve a second purpose beyond beauty, and that is they serve as a memorial. The walls are a way for God to honor his beloved bride. So the walls are there to honor Israel, whose names will be on the gates, and to honor the apostles who represent the church, to be the foundation stones for the city. Now, most likely the way that it's written and being the foundation stones for the walls is probably most likely we're talking about the cornerstones of the wall that are going to support the gates. But there's also theories that possibly it could be a 12-leveled city, and we'll get to those levels when we talk about how tall it is, where each level has its own foundation stone that is named by one of the apostles. And so the first level will be the Jasper Foundation, and that could be called level John. Second level will be Sapphire, and that could be called level Peter, and then so forth up for 12 levels. That's an option based upon the way the text is written, but it seems a little bit more likely that this is talking about the foundation stones for the gates of the city, but both are options in the way that it is written. And I think the key for us is to know that if you're in Jesus Christ today, what can you say about your hope for glory? And that is, if you're in Christ today, you can say that you have the hope of belonging in this beautiful city that is secure for all eternity. So if you have believed in the gospel of the 12 apostles, you have a place that is secured in this city. And if you're a little nervous about being like, I don't want to be in a cramped city for all of eternity, I don't want this little tiny Manhattan-style apartment to be my home, well, I don't think anybody is going to be cramped inside the New Jerusalem, because this, while being a city, it's going to be a real big city. Let's look at its size in verses 15 through 17. Then the one who spoke with me had a gold measuring rod to measure the city and its gates and its walls. The city is laid out as a square, and its length is as great as its width. And he measured the city with the rod, 1,500 miles. Its length and its width and height are equal. And he measured its walls, 72 yards, according to the human measurements, which are also angelic measurements. So the first thing we see about the New Jerusalem, it is a massive city. This city is so big, it is larger than any other city in history. But I don't really think the length and the width of the city is all that ridiculous. It's 1,500 miles from east to west, or 1,500 miles from north to south. We get that measurement because it's 12,000 Greek stadia. And so if you calculate 12,000 Greek stadia, convert it into miles, you get 1,500 miles. So a couple of images to help give us sort of a scale of what 1,500 miles square looks like. If the New Jerusalem was in America, that's what it would look like. So my home in Binghamton and New Orleans could be in the same city if it's the New Jerusalem. It's something that would probably take you about 3 days to drive from one end to the other, so a large size area there. And if it was set in the current world with Jerusalem as the center point of the city, here's what it would look like in if the geography of the world's all the same in the new heaven and the new earth. This is what it would look like with our current Jerusalem as the center of the New Jerusalem. So it's big. And what's the crazy part, though, about it is not that it is unreasonably long from north to south or east to west. Where it kind of gets ridiculous is that says it's as tall as it is wide, and that would mean it is 1,500 miles high. And 1,500 miles high, I'm going to admit, like that's pretty insane. Like, how insane is it? Right now, the tallest building in the world is the Burj Khalifa. I probably totally butchered that name. It's in Dubai. And if you look at images of that building in comparison to the other tallest buildings in the world, this building is just like, it dwarfs the other tallest buildings in the world. It is so tall. It is insane. Like, even if I went to that city and they're like, you could take an elevator ride to the top and look out, I don't know if I would want to do that. It's so tall. Like, it is just way up there. And how tall is it? It is almost exactly half a mile high. So 1/2 of 1 mile high, and the New Jerusalem is presented as 3,000 times higher than that building. So it's just a crazy height, which to me, you might want to be like, well, then this is obviously symbolic, like nothing's going to be that tall. But this is where we need to remember the New Jerusalem is the merging of heaven and earth. So there will be fundamental differences about our reality when we merge together heaven and earth. And so I think there should be some things about the eternal state, the new heaven and the new earth, where we just scratch our head and we're like, I don't see how that could work. And the answer is simply, yeah, it can't work right now. It can't work in the physical world that we have now, but when heaven comes down to earth, can it work then? Well, apparently it can, because we don't know what it's like when heaven and earth are brought together as one. But one of the results is that the city of the New Jerusalem will somehow be able to be just as high as it is wide, which is something crazy to think about it. The next thing that we see about the city walls is we are told the city walls are 72 yards or 216 feet. And here's one place where I'm like, John, could you not just give us one more piece of information? Because he says they're 72 yards or 216 feet, but he doesn't say like 72 yards relating to what? Are they 72 yards wide? Are they 216 feet high? He doesn't tell us that. One of the interesting things is that 216 feet is about the height of Solomon's temple at its highest point. So is he relating the height of these walls to the height of Solomon's temple? Is he talking about the width of the walls being 72 yards wide? And that might sound a little ridiculous, but if you look at really ancient city walls, multiple city walls were able to have chariot races on top of the walls. They were thick enough so that people's dwelling places were inside of them. So actually a 72 width thickness for the wall isn't all that, ridiculous of an amount. But then the question is, like, if the walls of the city are supposed to stretch up to the height, then this is probably talking about the width. But if they're just memorial decorative walls, then maybe they don't need to stretch miles and miles into the air. They could just be 216 feet high, which is about 2/3 of the length of a football field. So I think both the height and width easily could work for those, and we're not really sure which one it is. Regardless, though, I think the main purpose, though, of the measurements of the eternal state are meant to say, if you spend any time thinking about it, the first result should be there's plenty of room for me in this city. Like there's not going to be a point where Jesus is going to be like, okay, nobody else can believe in me because I've run out of room in the New Jerusalem. That will never happen. We could take all the people of all of human history and fit them in a city that is 1,500 square miles. That's one level. If it's a city, an urban, we could fit every human in all of history in that one city. Easy. It's not even like a difficult thing to do. But then if you're going to say it's multiple levels and it's high and it's, 1,500 miles high, it'd be so much space that having all of history's population in there, it'd kind of actually be sparse. Like you could have lots of space for lots of people that are there. So I think the main thing is to say there's lots of room for lots of people to fit in our final eternal state. And now we're going to spend the rest of our time talking about these walls and what they're made out of, which ends up being kind of really interesting. The material of the wall was jasper, and the city was pure gold, like clear glass. The foundation stones of the city wall were adorned with every kind of precious stone. The first foundation stone was jasper, the second sapphire, the third chalcedon, the fourth emerald, the fifth sardonyx, the sixth sardis, the seventh chrysolite, the eighth beryl, the ninth topaz, the 10th chrysoprase, I'm not even sure how to pronounce that one, the 11th jacinth, and the 12th amethyst. And the 12 gates were 12 pearls. Each one of the gates were a single pearl. And the streets of the city were pure gold, like transparent glass. So I had a really interesting week looking at this passage. So on Monday, I used Adobe picture editing software. Adobe now has artificial intelligence text to picture. So you can text in what you want, and then AI will come and give you an image of that. So as we've been going through Revelation for the last few months, the first image on the screen is each one has been me typing into the AI, some phrase or something from Revelation and having that, spit out a bunch of options. So on Monday, I'm putting things in to try to make up an image for the New Jerusalem. And as I'm doing this and putting in, words about an image of a gigantically tall city, and it's generating all of these images, I keep thinking about what it would be like to actually be in a city that is, miles and miles and miles tall. And the more I kept thinking about it, actually, the more depressed I ended up getting that this couldn't really happen. The reason I was thinking it couldn't really happen is that I've seen a lot of science fiction movies in my day. And if you have any sci-fi movie with a massively large city, that large as in it's tall, really tall, what always ends up happening, and because this is just logical, if you have a city that is miles and miles tall, what will the bottom of that city look like? It'll be dark. It will be dark and despairing at the bottom of that city. Why? Because if you have a whole bunch of buildings that are miles high, the sun will never get down to the bottom of that city. It will be in a perpetual shade. No one will want to live there, and it'll be like the slums of a city. And I'm thinking, obviously, the New Jerusalem will not have slums of a city in that. How will this work that you could have brightness in the bottom of the New Jerusalem? How can you get light all the way down there? How can a 1,500-mile city even work? And thinking it through, the answer came to me from a video that was sent to me by Karen at the beginning of this week. And I'd watched it probably, years ago and had forgotten about it. But thanks to Karen for reminding me about it. But it's a video by David Pawson, who was a Bible teacher, evangelist. He's since passed away. And I don't know where he learned about this information that he presented online, but he points out that all the stones that are listed in Revelation 21, from jasper to amethyst, they are a specific type of stone. They're a specific type of stone known as anisotropic. I have no idea if I'm saying that right. Outside of jewelers who use this feature to determine whether or not a rock is the genuine stone that it claims to be, most people don't know about this at all because it has no real bearing on stones in the way that we view them with our eyes today. But a gem that is anisotropic, again, forgive me if I'm butchering it, but if a gem is made of that property and you put filtered light through these stones, known as a cross-polarized light, which basically it's almost like you're kind of cleaning up the light by sending it through the filter so it gets more pure and more pure and more pure. We actually can't see this light with our own eyes when it becomes that pure. But when that pure light passes through these type of stones, what these stones do when they interact with that light is two things. These stones become brighter, so they actually light up, kind of like turning the lights on a Christmas tree. And then they take the light, and it's almost like they highlight the light and magnify it as it's sent out, kind of like rainbows from the inside of the gem. So it does all these kind of funky things to the lights. They make it brighter. And as I'm reading this, I'm like, this is not a real thing. I've never heard of it before. And so I end up going and looking it up online, and it's a real thing. And the feature that it has today is that some of the most expensive gems in the world, like diamonds and rubies, they are not anisotropic. So what they'll do is they'll shine that light into a diamond, and if it refracts in the way that it does for those gems, they'll be like, oh, this isn't a real diamond. It's a fake one, because if you send that light into a real diamond, the light won't go through it. It'll just kind of deaden and nothing will happen. So they use this technique to determine the authenticity of certain gems. Well, the thing is, if you have this filtered pure light, and you had a city that was made out of these stones. What the stones would do whenever they interact with that light, instead of the light decreasing and the city getting darker, these stones would make the light increase and the city would get brighter. And so if you had a central point of light in this city shining out, and the city was made all of these type of stones, what you would end up doing is you'd end up being like you were living in a city filled with rainbows, and it would be the brightest thing that's imaginable. It would probably end up being so bright that our eyes today would not be able to handle even glimpsing a city of this brightness and this magnitude. But the craziest thing is that God has for us in Revelation 21 this list of 12 gems. He passes up some gems that are real valuable, like diamonds and rubies, and includes some what you might call like second-class gems in value. But they're all this same type of rock. Like, I mean, just the statistical probability that God would pick 12 gems that are all this same type of rock, when no one knew this type of rock existed until we had laser technology in the mid-20th century. So nobody even knew that this was a thing until, about 50 years ago. And God picks all rocks that fit in this same category. So it's just kind of an insane thing. But I really appreciated it because I was, like, man, some part of this city is going to need to be real dark if it's that tall, because the light's just not going to be able to shine through the whole thing. Well, if God's light is as pure as it possibly could be, and he makes a city out of all of these rocks that have this same property, the result would be God sending forth his own light, which would be of the purest property. What it would end up doing is God's light would just refract and enhance the more and more as it spread throughout the city, so that there would not be a place of darkness in this city, but it would actually have a light that's more brilliant than any light that we could possibly experience from our sun shining through the atmosphere right now. So it's kind of a really cool thing. But so that's something that I was struggling with early on, and so I saw this and brings all of this together so that it would really make sense. And while sunlight would not work for these rocks to allow this principle to take place, we need to remember in the very next verse, in verse 22, that it will not be the sun that is lighting up the New Jerusalem. I saw no temple in it, for the Lord God, the Almighty, and the Lamb are its temple. And the city had no need of the sun or of the moon to shine on it, for the glory of God has illumined it, and its lamp is the Lamb. And we'll talk some more about this verse next week, but I'm just bringing this up to highlight that the New Jerusalem, the eternal state, will not be lit by the sun, but it'll be lit by God's glory himself. And so God, it appears, based on what we can see, based upon these stones, and maybe God didn't pick these stones for this reason, but man, it's a weird coincidence if he didn't, that, there are all these types of stones, because, you'd think diamonds and rubies would be like right up toward the top of the list, because they've been valuable for like all of human history. But, if God has this pure light radiating from himself, then he would have this entire city that is shining with a brightness and a brilliance, the likes of which we have never seen, and probably our current physical eyes wouldn't be able to appreciate the light and the brightness of this city. And so there'll be a glory in the New Jerusalem that really, I don't think we'd be able to appreciate in our world today, or even in the millennial kingdom that comes after, but there will be a splendor, the likes of which we have never seen before.